Hi, my name's Keely from Bound Bindery, and I'm going to show you how to turn your book into a special hardcover book. In this video, we're going to be covering how to make a hardcover. Now, the first step is to get your book board, your Davy board, chipboard, whatever you're using, and we're going to cut it to size. So here you can see I'm using a chipboard. Mine is 1.8 millimeters thick, but you can get anything from 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters. And we're gonna measure this and cut it down to size. A lot of people struggle with getting the correct measurements, so I'm going to show on screen the measurements I use, and feel free to screenshot this, make it work for yourself, and I'm just going to talk you through it while I do that measuring in the background. So for the height, what I'm going to do is add on 7 millimeters to the height of my book. The reason we add on a little bit of height is because we want to have a bit of overhang once we put our text block into the hardcover case. So by adding 7 millimeters, that's going to give me a bit over 3 millimeters on the top and bottom to work with. And then I'm going to actually take 3 millimeters off the width of my board for the front cover. The reason for this is because there's going to be a 1 centimeter space that we leave for the hinge of our book. And by taking off that 3 millimeters, it's going to give us the perfect 3 millimeter overhang at the end. The last measurement we need is the width of our spine. And the way I measured this is the spine itself plus the depth of the book board. So for me, this book board is 1.8 millimeters thick. So I want to add on roughly 3 millimeters to my measurements. So on screen, you can see that I've replaced the measurements here with the exact measurements I'm using for this book. So 19.8 centimeters high, we're adding on the 7 millimeters, which means I want the board height to be 20.5 centimeters. With the width, we're taking off that 3 millimeters, so I want it to be 12.5 centimeters wide. And for the spine, the book spine is 2.2 centimeters. So to add on the 3 millimeters for our book board, I need a spine that is 2.5 centimeters wide. Keeping in mind, these measurements are all accurate if you're using a 1 centimeter hinge. If you use a bigger or a smaller hinge, you may need to change some of these measurements. If in doubt, keep your book board a little bit bigger than what you need at this stage, and you can always trim it down to size later on down the track, but you won't be able to make it bigger. Here you can see I'm trimming down the chipboard using my corkback ruler and a Stanley knife. What I'm doing is after I've made those measurements, I'm lining them up to the grid lines on my cutting mat as well. This is just an extra step to make sure that I'm making really straight cuts. So here I am cutting the correct height for the book board, and the width of this is actually going to cover the front, back, and spine piece for my book. They all have the same height. I'm going to go through and cut out the front, back, and spine pieces. I hardly ever show this part of the process, so I will leave it all in real time. Feel free to skip past this part, but I know it is helpful for people to see just how many times I need to cut through the board and just how long it really does take me to make these boards. Now that I have my front, back, and spine piece all cut out, I'm just going to line it up against the book just to see if I'm happy with the size of everything. With the spine piece, I'm really wanting to make sure it's covering the whole spine, including the front and back board. So you can see here I'm just doing it in a few different ways to make sure that I'm happy with how it's all lining up, and I'm pretty happy with these sizes. Now that I'm happy with the sizes of the book board, I'm going to lay down some parchment paper because we're going to start gluing our case together. And I'm going to be doing what's called the braidle bind method. So this is where we're actually going to build the case on a piece of cardstock first. So you want a piece of card that's the exact same height as your book board, and it's about 5 inches thick. What we're going to do is we're going to add a strip of glue down the middle that's the same width as your spine, and smooth that out, make a nice even spread of glue, and we're going to attach our spine to that cardstock. Once you're happy with the placement, we're going to smooth it down, turn it over, and again, just make sure that that card is adhered well to the board. And then we're going to start making our hinges. So we're going to grab our bone folder, smooth it down, and we're going to start pressing in the edges. And again, this is the start of what's going to be our hinges. So we're going to do both sides of that. Don't use the point at this point because it is just cardstock and you could pierce the paper. So just use the flat edge of it, make sure that it's a nice firm line. Because my hinges are going to be 1 centimeter, I'm using a 1 centimeter spacer. You don't have to use a tool like this, but I do find it's really helpful when we're trying to get a nice right angle and have even spacing between these boards. You could just measure along it though, draw a straight line and make sure that you're attaching it straight or line it up against a ruler. You can find these on Etsy or on Amazon, and I do find that they are really helpful, but certainly not a necessary part of it. And what I'm going to do is just press that board right up against it. We're going to attach it to the glue that we just laid down, and we're going to try to get a nice right angle here. So once we've done that, we're just going to repeat that exact same process on the other side. Again, I use 1 centimeter just because I find that works well with the measurements that I've done. If you have a smaller, you can do a smaller space, but you'll just have to make allowances for that. This is me realizing that I'm not left-handed and can't do it that way. Again, just because I'm getting glue all over that parchment paper, I don't want to put the book board down on top of it because I'll get glue all over my board. So once I've put the glue down, I move the parchment paper and then stick my book board on top of that. And that's going to help you to not get glue all over the case that you've started to make. So here we have the beginnings of our hardcover case, and the next step is just to make sure that we're happy with the measurements. So we're going to do what's called a dry fit. So this is where we're not gluing anything in place, we're just going to line this up against our text block and see if we're happy with the sizes. So it's at this point, if you left your board a little bit bigger than you need it, you can actually trim it down to size. So if you find that it's a little bit too tall, you can just lay it down, cut all along the top. Again, if you find that your width is too long, you can put it down and trim down the side. And again, I'm just checking here that it's squared off against itself. And this is how you have a really nice fitting book at the end, is to make sure that everything's square at this point. So the next step is to attach our book cloth. I did have someone ask whether the grain of the book cloth matters, and I'm sure it probably does at some point, but I've never paid attention to the grain of my book cloth and I've never had any issues. So do with that what you will. But what we're going to do here is just start to glue it down. So you're going to put your book cloth down, cloth side down, and what is laying up now is what you can see is it's got a paper backing, and so we're going to glue onto that paper backing. Now, book cloth is slightly different to normal cloth because it is a little bit thicker. It stops glue from seeping through, and it's also going to protect your book a little bit better. I do go through that in my materials video so you can find the best covering material for you. And I always start by just gluing down my spine. So you can see here, again, applying just a really thin layer of glue all over the spine and also in the hinges. So I'm doing that at this point as well. If you do too much here, it will seep through your book cloth, even with the paper backing. So just make sure it's a small amount. You don't want to have any buildup anywhere. And once we start to smooth it down, hopefully you won't get any glue showing through. I just try to make sure it's roughly centered in the book cloth, and I'll start by pressing it down on this side and then I'll flip it over, and you'll want to have your bone folder handy so you can start going in with that. And here I am just smoothing it down. Now, if you don't have a bone folder, I actually use a Sharpie. So this is what I used when I first started out, but I actually still find myself going back to it to help make these hinges. I find that it's just the perfect size to smooth it down and get right in those hinges to make them really crispy. So if you have that laying around, definitely recommend, even with the bone folder, I still find myself going through and using that. And what we're doing here is just, sped it up for you, but we're just gonna keep on going into those hinges, make sure the glue is adhering really well, and making sure that everything is smooth, laid down flat. So that does take quite some time to go through and do. And the next step is to do the same, but with our cover, with the front and back cover. So here I am going in with the front cover, a really light layer of glue. We're going to get a bigger brush for this one, and you'll see I'm going to keep this part in real time, but I'm just going to smooth it all out really evenly. It's the exact same thing as the spine. If you have a build up, it will start to seep through and show on your book, on the book cloth. So take your time, make sure it's a really smooth, even layer. You do want to make sure there's glue on all parts of it though, because you don't want it lifting later on down the track. So here I am just going and putting a little bit of extra in some of those dry spots, and I'll do this for quite a while, to be honest. I'll go back and forth, make sure that there's glue in all the right parts, it's all evenly coated, and then once I'm happy with it, we'll flip it over. So now that that's evenly coated, I'm going to move that paper out of the way again, and I'm going to start to flatten down that book cloth. So I always start with my hands, just making sure that there are no air bubbles, that it's just really smoothly placed over the glue. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll go in with my bone folder and just make sure that it's quite firmly attached. You can see here, because it's not being too thick, we don't have any glue showing through. I clearly need to get a lint roller because there are little specks of stuff all over this. So sorry if that's annoying anyone who's watching. And then just keep on going back and forth over that until you're happy with how it's all stuck. And then we're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Now that the case is attached to the book cloth, I'm going to go around and trim up the edges. This is an unnecessary step, but I like it because it just makes the final book look nice and clean, because you do see some of these edges show through the end paper. So here I am, this is about an inch, maybe a little bit longer, and I'm just going to go through and trim off any of the excess fabric. Once you're happy with your book cloth, we're going to trim the corners. So here I am using a little bookbinding tool called a corner cutter. This is 3.5 millimeters wide, and I'm just going to use a Stanley knife to cut off the edges. Again, you definitely don't need to have a tool like this. I often just go in with scissors and cut right to the edge. But you do want to leave just a little bit of space so that when you fold the edges over, you want to make sure that you're fully covering the book cloth, and 3.5 millimeters is the perfect width for a 1.8 millimeter thickness book board. And after that, it's time to go and wrap our edges over our book board. So here I am just creasing it, making it a bit easier for when we glue them in. Lots of gluing in this step, so get your parchment paper ready, and what we're going to do is start with the long edges. So across the top, I'm just applying a thin layer of glue. You don't want to use too much here, mainly just because it gets super messy if you do. So here I am just spreading that glue out evenly across that line. I want to make sure, again, we're getting just an even coating over that. I said don't use too much glue, but here I am going in with more glue. It's a balance between making sure you do have glue covering everything and not wanting to have too much. Now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to move that paper away and I'm going to start folding these over. Again, we just want to try and make sure we're not getting glue all over the bits that we're going to see. You can see that I did get a little bit of glue on the edge there, but that will be covered by paper later on. But you do just want to make sure that it's not getting all over the tops of it. And this is where if you have too much glue, you'll find that it all starts seeping out the bottom. And I just start smoothing that down first with my fingers, and then you'll see I go in with a bone folder later on. And we just want to make sure that it's all smooth. Again, this is just a really nice way to make sure that your final book looks really tidy, just to make sure you don't have any creases that are showing here. So I just go through, make sure there are no creases. You'll also see me turn it over, and I'm just going to go over that hinge gap again. Because we've applied more glue, it's just a chance for us to make sure that it's really firmly pressed against each other. This is how you get those nice crispy hinges. Now that we've done that side, I'm going to go through and just repeat that exact same process on the other side. So I'm going to speed this up for you a little bit just because we've already seen me do it once, but I'm literally going to follow the exact same process. Now that we've done the two long edges, we're going to move on to the short edge. So I'm just finding a clean piece of parchment paper, and we're going to do the exact same thing with a smaller change of we're going to turn in the corners. So you saw me point out those two edges just then. So we're going to first of all make sure that we have glue covering the entire thing. But this time I'm going to use the tip of my bone folder just to press in those edges. That's because if you were to just fold it over without doing that, they would kind of hang out. So I'm just going to move it out of the way, push those little bits in. So there's one, push that side in, and these are going to give you really nice smooth edges. And then do the exact same thing, fold that over, smooth it all out. And I'll give you a close up here in a second just so you can see how they look once we've turned that in. So now we've only got one side left to go. So again, turning around, getting another clean piece of that baking paper, and we're just going to follow that exact same process again. Now you finish that, you have officially got your hard case. So what I'm going to do here is just bend it all down, make sure it's all creasing where it should, and make sure that there are no imperfections that I'm not happy with. And then the last step is just to put it somewhere, put something heavy on it and just leave it for an hour and give it a chance to completely dry. While that's drying, I'm going to show you how I design the cover. So I use heat transfer vinyl for my designs, and what I do is, this is the Cricut brand in soft gold, and I cut out my design with a silhouette machine, and I'll do a separate video on the actual designing of my cover, but I use a silhouette machine. I'll put the settings that I use up on screen now, and what I'm doing here is just what we call weeding. So weeding is the process of taking away the excess material, so you're left with a design that you're going to transfer onto your hardcover. So this can be quite a tedious process. So this is a time lapse of me doing it here, and you'll see I've actually messed up on this spine piece here. So some of the wings of that key didn't come through well enough, so I've just completely taken them off, and I'll show you how I fix that when I'm actually ironing on the design. But here you go, that's where they've not come off. Yeah, that's where I'll kind of have to fix that. But here's a close-up of the designs, and I fix this one a little bit later on as well. So now that we've got our dry case, what we need to do is iron these onto our hardcover. So I'm putting down a chopping block because you can't put any heat on those mats. I don't want to melt it through. So I'm going to put this hardcover down. I'm deciding which side I want to be my front side. So you see me chop and change a little bit there. I'm going to have my front cover design on the right. So here I am just lining it up. Don't mind my head getting in the way there. I realized there was a little bit that I didn't weed, so I just go out, take that, fix that up, and I'm going to come back with it. Now that I'm happy everything has been weeded correctly, I'm just going to pop that down on the hardcover, but I'm going to prepare the heat press. So I actually use the Cricut mini press, and I recommend using this over an iron just because it has really consistent heat. I use it on the second setting with this material, and so I'm just going to pop that to the side, let it heat up. You can use an iron, but I would definitely recommend using that. And here I am just measuring the design just to make sure it's right in the middle. I make my designs 1 centimeter shorter in the height and the width so that when it's right in the middle of my case, there should be 0.5 centimeter on either side. So here I am just going in with the ruler, making sure that there is 0.5 centimeter on either side, and it's a combination of measuring and just making sure it looks right. And once my heat presses come up to temperature, I'm going to go over fairly lightly to start with, just to set everything in place. Sometimes you'll find that if you're really firm in one spot and if you tug on it, it can pull. So what I do is just go over the entire design really gently, make sure it's all in the spot that I want it to. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll go back over, leave the heat on a little bit longer in some places, and let it really adhere then. So here I am just going over it, making sure that I'm using firmer pressure and making sure that every part of the design has had heat on it. This is what I wish someone told me when I first started this, is to use whatever tool this is called. And what I'm doing is called burnishing. So when you burnish something, you're rubbing really hard on it to help it adhere. So if I were to just use the iron, then sometimes you can burn the book cloth, which means all the glue will start melting and seeping back through, and it can leave marks on your cover. But because you want it to be adhered really well, I make sure that the whole design has had heat applied, and then I go through this, and I will go back and forth and repeat this process quite a few times until I'm happy with it. Now that I am happy with the front design, I'm going to go in with the spine piece. So even though I'm missing those two little designs, I'm going to add them on a little bit later. This is also the moment where I realized I actually had made my spine design too wide. I mentioned before, I usually allow for 1 centimeter. I make the design 1 centimeter shorter on each side, but I didn't make this one shorter on the spine. So the width of it really does go the entire width of the spine. Luckily, it's not bigger, so I can get away with it, but just keep that in mind. Double check your measurements before you cut things out. So here I am doing the exact same process, making sure that it's all adhered. I'm going to go in, burnish it, rub that down really firmly and vigorously, and then go back and forth with the heat and doing that until I'm happy with it. The last step is this last little design that I cut out. I redid this one just because some of the elements started to pull off before, and here I am just making sure it's completely centered on the back. Again, feel free to fast forward through this, but I know that applying the design to the hardcover case is such a tricky part for so many people, so I really wanted to show you what I do in real time. I will say that using the Cricut material works so much better than any other metallic, and I highly recommend. And here I am just leaving it to completely cool. And I'm going to zoom you in nice and close so you can see how it comes off. And you can see here the design isn't sticking at all. If it did stick to the transfer sheet, I would lay it back down and I would go over it again until it doesn't come off at all when I pull it up. But yes, you will get much better results if you use a Cricut brand. I almost wish it didn't work as well as what it did so I could show you what I do for the really challenging ones, but I am thankful that this did work out how it should. And because those designs came off and I didn't want to reprint the entire, or recut I should say, the entire spine, I just cut out the individual design elements and I'm going to go through and iron these on separately. Now I'm going to lay some baking paper over the top of this because I don't want to melt off the design I've already put down. And this time I'm being really, really gentle with where I'm putting it, and I'm trying to direct the heat with the tip just onto the design itself, because you can warp and melt off the rest of the design if you do that. And here I am just using the corner to go over just those little designs that I've added. Here I am just going over it again just to make sure it's had heat applied evenly to it. Again, I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes, and then once I'm confident that it's cooled down, I'll come back and take these off with you. So you can see there are some slight markings on the heat transfer vinyl that was there before, and I'll show you it up close. So this is why I try not to go over the designs if I don't need to. So you can see there, that's just a little imperfection in the heat transfer vinyl just from me going over it with that Cricut again. But that's it, that's the final step in making your hardcover. In my next video, I'll show you casing in and the final result. Follow along for more.